This hearing will come to order. I'll ask everyone to take their seats at this time. And this hearing is on implications of a nuclear agreement with Iran. And this morning, the committee continues to examine the administration's agreement. And to help further assess this deal, we're joined by several retired officers, 2 admirals and a general, who served their country with distinction. And we have a noted thinker with us on the region. And this, by the way, is, I think, the 30th hearing that we've held on this issue, 30th hearing or briefing since these negotiations began. And I appreciate the commitment that all the members have made to analyze what is a very complex issue here as the House gets set for a vote this week. And I'd like to recognize Ranking Member Engel for his partnership as we have approached the issue in a bipartisan way throughout these hearings. And unfortunately, in my view, it's quite clear, my conclusion, quite clear that this agreement makes Iran stronger at the end of the day. And I say that because the billions of dollars here, some $100 billion, provided in immediate sanctions relief, is just a down payment, as Iran is guaranteed a reconnection to the global economy. The strangle on its banks and businesses, the money that has been held in escrow, will now be returned to the regime. It will be returned in the way of a system in Iran where the IRGC and the Quds forces own many of the major businesses in the country. So it is not just unlocking this money from escrow into the accounts of senior IRGC leaders and clerics and the Ayatollah himself, who increasingly control the businesses in Iran. But it's also putting in motion what comes next in terms of future deals, where those individuals are going to be the key decision makers. They're the ones that are going to be empowered under this agreement. And politically, of course, that means it solidifies the supreme leader's grip on power. That's why he did the deal, to keep his revolution intact. As we said early on, the right kind of a pressure on Iran would give that Ayatollah a choice between real compromise on his nuclear program or economic collapse. But that legislation that we passed to put on those additional sanctions was blocked in the Senate. So, militarily, in a few short years, if they wait that long, Iran is free to build up its tanks, its fighter jets, its intercontinental ballistic missiles. Its proxies in the region can continue to wreak havoc and back terrorism. Indeed, Iran's elite Quds force has transferred funds to Hamas to rebuild a network of tunnels from Gaza to attack Israel. Now, myself and Ranking Member Engel have been in those tunnels. And I must tell you, reading the account in the Journal of the fact that Israel is now going to is going to face a situation where the Quds forces and the Iranian regime are going to not only rebuild the terror tunnels, but have also made the commitment to transfer the rockets to replenish the inventory. And on top of that, the commitment now, the discussion on the part of Iran to transfer the precision-guided weapons so that Hezbollah will have the opportunity to unleash what used to be an inventory of 10,000 rockets and missiles. When I was there in Haifa in '06, and those rockets were slamming into the city, and there were 600 people in the trauma hospital, there was an inventory of 10,000. Now, thanks to Iran, there's an inventory of over 80,000 of these. And what is it that Iran seeks to do? It needs the hard currency to transfer that capability for GPS guidance, for a system that will allow the targeting of those rockets and missiles so that individual targets, individual buildings, the airport, and so forth can be hit inside Israel. That's what we're talking about when we say that it's going to unleash $100 billion in capital that is held right now. And then Iran is a few steps away from a nuclear weapons program on an industrial scale. It will take a few years, but at the end of that process, as the President has detailed, Iran will be a step away from that. As Iran grows stronger across the board, the United States will be weaker to respond. By removing economic sanctions, the President is withdrawing one of our most successful, peaceful tools for confronting the Iranian regime. As international investment pours into Iran, there's going to be tremendous political pressure to not upset that apple cart, to keep the agreement going at all costs, no matter what Iranian cheating might be found. Why do I think that? Because we've already seen Soleimani, General Soleimani of the Quds Force, take his trip into Russia to negotiate. We've already seen the announcement of the Fatah, 313 rocket with a missile with a range of over 300 miles. That was presented a few weeks ago. Is anyone speaking out about arms violations with respect to transfer of these types of weapons to Hamas and Hezbollah? No, because they don't want to upset the apple cart. Indeed, the administration pressure, there was a lot of pressure on the IAEA. Some of that came from the administration. And that got us a deal with the Iranians being able to self-inspect a key military site, setting a dangerous precedent, frankly, for the future. Because when you set that standard for self-inspections, that becomes the precedent that everybody else wants, including the Iranians the next time they're challenged on the suspicion of some particular military site where they might be doing work. And even if we wanted to hit back against Iran's cheating, snapping back sanctions, I think, under these conditions, especially with the Iranians having a vote on this seven-member consortium of countries that are going to determine this, China having a vote, Russia having a vote, they only have to pick off one more European country that they're doing business with in order to make it very, very difficult for us to have snapback. As a group of 200 retired generals and admirals recently concluded, this agreement will enable Iran to become far more dangerous, render the Mideast still more unstable, and introduce new threats to American interests as well as our allies. In our professional opinion, far from being an alternative to war, the agreement makes it likely that the war the Iranian regime has waged against us since 1979 will continue, with far higher risks to our national security interests. Are the temporary restraints on Iran's nuclear program under this agreement worth that cost? President Obama is clearly betting that it is, that Iran will change enough over a short 10 to 15 years to be trusted with what, by then, will be internationally endorsed bomb-making technology on an industrial scale. But, as we'll hear today, that is a bet against history. As one witness recently wrote, Iran's enduring hostility towards us isn't an accident of historical inertia, but a choice by Iran, a choice based upon a world view that was founded in large measure on a fiery theological anti-Americanism, an officially sanctioned and officially disseminated view of Americanism as Satanism. And that's why we're used to hearing that retort from the Ayatollah, that Israel is the little Satan and the United States is the great Satan. So I now turn to the ranking member, Mr. Elliot Engel of New York, for any opening comments he may have.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for calling today's hearing. When all's said and done with the Iran deal, I don't think anyone will accuse this committee of skimping on our due diligence. We've heard from administration officials and experts from across the spectrum, so thank you for your leadership, Mr. Chairman, and thoroughness on this issue. To our witnesses, welcome to the Foreign Affairs Committee. I look forward to your testimony. I certainly respect everyone's opinions, even though they may differ than mine. But as I announced a month ago, I cannot support the Iran nuclear deal. I've laid out the concerns that led me to that decision, and I'll quickly recap. First of all, I'm not persuaded that this deal will give IAEA inspectors the access they need to do their jobs, Between potentially lengthy delays and confusion over inspecting the Parchin military base, this deal leaves too many loopholes for the Iranians to slip through. Unfettered access for inspectors is the only way we can be sure Iran stops its work towards a nuclear weapon, and this deal does not provide unfettered access. Secondly, I believe the deal gives away too much when it comes to sanctions on advanced conventional weapon and ballistic missile development. As far as I knew, these issues weren't even on the table, yet with this deal, a few years down the road, Iran could be buying advanced weapons and building missiles and still be fully compliant with its obligations. And even if Iran were to violate these provisions early, that violation wouldn't trigger a snapback of economic sanctions. Which brings me to another concern. What will Iran's leaders do when they again have access to the billions and billions of dollars currently frozen by international sanctions? Even with the sanctions in place, Iran has been the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism. When these new resources pour into Iran, I have no doubt it will mean payday for Hamas, Hezbollah, and other extremist groups around the world. The intentions are pretty clear of leaders who chant death to America and death to Israel just days after concluding an agreement. And lastly and fundamentally, 15 years from now, this deal allows Iran to produce highly enriched weapons-grade uranium without any restriction. This deal legitimizes Iran as a nuclear threshold state in the year 2030, gives Iran's leaders the green light to build a stockpile of nuclear fuel. If they pursue that course, and I believe they will, it could trigger a nuclear arms race across the region. Even a decade and a half away, that's a risk we cannot take. Those are my chief concerns, and that's why I can't support this deal. But I don't think anyone here would disagree that it's going to be very difficult to stop this deal from being implemented. So I think it's important for us to start considering what are the next steps if and when this deal goes through. What will we need to ensure the security of Israel and our other friends and allies in the region, including the Sunni Gulf states? What steps can be taken to prevent Iran's newfound wealth from ending up in terrorist hands? I know we'll hear a lot today from witnesses and my colleagues that this is not the deal we hoped for, and I agree. And I do believe this committee now has a responsibility to look ahead and think strategically about what comes next. So I look forward to hearing from our witnesses, Mr. Chairman. I thank you again, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Engel. And this morning, we're pleased to be...
Would the ranking member yield before he yields back his time?
I would be happy to yield.
I thank my chair. Given the fact that both the chairman and ranking member have talked about their concerns about the deal, just for the record, there are a number of us who actually have a different opinion. I believe this is a vigorous and enforceable agreement. I believe it is the only path to peace. I believe it rolls back the nuclear capability of Iran for a substantial period of time that gives us time to make sure we have an even more long-lasting agreement. I believe it's enforceable. I believe it's verifiable. I believe it is a robust agreement. I believe it's one we don't need to apologize for, and the choice is stark. They're within 2 to 3 months of developing a bomb or 15 years. I choose the latter enthusiastically, and I thank the ranking member for his courtesy and the chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Connolly. This morning, we're pleased to be joined by a distinguished panel with a range of views before the committee. General Chuck Wald served as the former Deputy Commander of the U.S. European Command, overseeing all U.S. forces operating across 91 countries in Europe, Africa, Russia, parts of Asia and the Middle East, and most of the Atlantic Ocean. Admiral William Fallon served as the former commander of the U.S. Central Command, where he directed all U.S. military operations in the Middle East, Central Asia, and the Horn of Africa. Vice Admiral John Byrd served in a variety of positions, including as the former commander of the 7th Fleet and as the director of Navy Staff. Mr. Leon Wieseltier is the Isaiah Berlin Senior Fellow in Culture and Policy at the Brookings Institution. He is a senior editor and critic at The Atlantic, for which he recently wrote an article titled "The Iran Deal and the Rut of History." And so without objection, the witnesses' full prepared statements will be made part of the record. Members will have 5 calendar days to submit statements and questions and any extraneous material for the record. And General Wald, I'd ask you if you could please summarize your remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Engel, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the implications of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. I've served in the Air Force as a pilot and air commander for over 3 decades. I've commanded air operations in Bosnia and Afghanistan, and am intimately familiar with the U.S. allies and adversaries in the Middle East, as well as the capabilities the U.S. military uses to protect one and deter and defeat the other. 2 weeks ago, JINS's Germunders Center for Defense and Strategy released a report from its new Iran Strategy Council, which I co-chaired and which Vice Admiral Byrd is also a member, analyzing the Iran deal's potentially grave repercussions. Our findings are straightforward. JCPOA does not reduce the need for a robust military presence in the Middle East, nor does it preclude the possibility of a military confrontation with Iran. Instead, it creates a much more difficult strategic environment for the United States to operate over the next 15 years, if not longer. Let me explain how we came to that conclusion. First, the deal does not prevent a nuclear Iran. It merely kicks the centrifuge issue down the road for 15 years, when the agreement's major nuclear restrictions lapse. At that point, according to President Obama, Iran will have advanced centrifuges that enrich uranium fairly rapidly, and at that point, the breakout times would have shrunk almost down to zero. Should Tehran decide to sprint for nuclear weapons capability, something that it could do in weeks, if not days, U.S. options for preventing a nuclear Iran will be extremely limited. Second, Iran could still become a nuclear threshold power. This does not remove the need to maintain a long-term, credible military option against Iran's nuclear program. This is why President Obama has also cautioned that if 15 or 20 years from now Iran tries to build a bomb, this deal ensures the United States will have the same options available to stop weapons programs as we have today, including, if necessary, military options. Third, the deal actually increases the need for the United States to project power in the region so to protect its interests and allies from potential Iranian interference. Vice Admiral Byrd will testify. JCPOA grants Iran access to resources and technology with which to modernize its armed forces and continue to pursue the pursuit of hegemonic and destabilizing activities in the Middle East. This leads to the question, if continued or increased U.S. military presence in the Middle East will be required under this deal, what will the strategic environment that we will be operating look like? I believe two main dynamics will shape the ability of the United States military to project power and operate in the Middle East. First, the decline in U.S. military capabilities. End strength, force structure, readiness, and modernization that is already happening and will only get worse if sequestration, the decades of cuts to the defense budget, are allowed to continue for the remaining 6 years. Second, the erosion of U.S. credibility in the eyes of our Middle Eastern allies as a result of our accepting a deal that they view as fundamentally dangerous. Combined, these dynamics mean the United States may still have the military option when JCPOA expires, but it will face a far more dangerous and difficult one than it is today. In sum, this deal creates a strategic environment in which Iran can pursue nuclear weapons capability at a much lower level of risk. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Admiral Fallon.
Mr. Chairman, Congressman Engel, members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity to address this distinguished body and to offer my perspective on this nuclear arrangement with Iran and related questions. I think this is an important issue because Iran has accumulated a very large quantity of enriched uranium and is, by many accounts, near the threshold of nuclear weapons capability. This emerging capacity, when coupled with a virulent anti-Western rhetoric and a long record of malign activities, presents a very real threat to U.S. interests. Iranian bad behavior abroad, spearheaded by the IRGC, Quds Force, and executed mainly by their proxies, has fomented regional instability and attacked U.S. personnel and interests around the world, actions which I witnessed firsthand in Lebanon in the early 1980s and in Iraq and Afghanistan when I was commander of U.S. CENTCOM in the last decade. I'm under no illusions regarding Iranian government behavior since the Islamic Revolution, and I believe that some elements in that country would be very pleased to possess nuclear weapons. It is precisely this near-term potential to achieve nuclear weapons capability that I believe presents the most serious challenge with Iran. Notwithstanding many grievances and intolerable activity by the Iranian agents in places around the world, the most pressing issue for America, Israel, and our Middle Eastern allies is the very real possibility that Iran could soon acquire a nuclear weapon. To address this threat, representatives of the international community have been negotiating for many months with one key objective: to stop Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. The resulting joint plan, in my opinion, offers a good chance to do just that, and is far superior to the status quo alternative, which would leave Iran with a massive stockpile of enriched uranium, no firsthand scrutiny of ongoing related activities, and if this deal is rejected, new motivation to accelerate their efforts. I have scrutinized this agreement very carefully, and I support it with reservations, and I recommend your approval of the plan. Frankly, I was surprised, but pleased that so many diverse interests represented in the negotiations could actually coalesce an agreement on a document that, on balance, I think is a reasonable way forward. But I want to make perfectly clear about the most important reality. Neither we nor the Iranians really trust each other to actualize the features of this deal. And that's very important to keep in mind as we go forward. A positive aspect of this arrangement is that after more than 36 years of open hostility and a lack of substantive discussion on any issue, the two sides came together and agreed a way ahead of utmost importance. The negative is the devil in the detail. The implementation is going to require close scrutiny and verification. I think the most important strength of the deal is the broad international agreement and the priority of stopping Iran's nuclear weapons. There are many points you can read in my testimony that I think effectively block the uranium path to a weapon by sabotaging the Iraq heavy water reactor. It basically sets back the plutonium option for a amount of time. There are other issues that have been addressed variously and will be addressed, I think, by the IAEA. You can have your own opinions about those. I think that the biggest weakness of the agreement is that there doesn't appear to be any practically effective way to monitor very small-scale Iranian misbehavior should they choose to continue or resume it. Likewise, the full resolution of the PMD suspicions is really unlikely because it would probably depend on Iranian admission of past violations of the NPT and a comprehensive safeguards agreement. And historically, the IAEA has not been seen as the most aggressive entity in pursuing scofflaws. Regarding long-term implications of the agreement on regional stability, I think there's good potential for positive development. The most important issue, the imminent threat of Iranian nuclear weapon, has forestalled easing the high anxiety that exists in the region and with Israel. Suspension of sanctions will increase economic activity and personal travel, boosting interaction with the Iranian population, resulting in pressure to normalize state-to-state relationships. The potential for confidence building and maybe even trust at some point between Iran and the international community as implementation proceeds could initiate a more pragmatic political dynamic inside Iran to address the very real unrest and frustrations of the population, the majority of whom are under 30 years of age. Much is going to depend on Iranian behavior towards its neighbors and whether it continues to instigate the Shia minorities to confront Sunni leadership in the Gulf countries. And in Iraq, there's certainly some overlap in U.S. and Iranian interest, but clearly their priority is to maintain influence with Baghdad. In addressing Iran's benign activities globally, we should make sure at every opportunity that cooperation with Iran on this comprehensive current nuclear weapons deal in no way will excuse or cause us to ignore Iranian bad behavior in other areas. Strengthening our ties to the GCC, encouraging cooperative security efforts by these nations, supported by consistent engagement by U.S. forces, should reassure these countries of American resolve and disabuse them of any notion that we may be aligning ourselves with Iranian interests in the region. The significant current disagreement between the U.S. and Israel regarding the approach to Iran is recognized as a difference in priority of national interest, should be addressed with a continued strong U.S. commitment to Israeli security. In summary, this joint plan is a unique opportunity to address one of the most pressing issues of international security and stability today. The agreement has been painstakingly negotiated in concert with allies and other parties, and I believe offers the most reasonable and likely way ahead to forestall an Iranian nuclear weapon for the next decade or more. It may not satisfy every aspiration, but I have heard no credible alternative proposal. American initiative and persistence enabled the parties to come to agreement, and continued leadership will be essential for successful implementation. I recommend congressional support with continued engagement to enable implementation and verification of the many complex and critical aspects of the agreement. Thank you, and I'll be pleased to answer any specific questions you may have.
Thank you, Admiral. Admiral Byrd.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Engel, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. It's an honor and a privilege to be here joined by such distinguished and highly accomplished professionals on this panel. My decades of service as first a career submarine officer and then a fleet commander of the United States Navy have afforded me the experience and expertise to understand potential threats posed by adversaries like Iran, especially in the maritime environment. Along with General Wald, I am a member of the new Iran Strategy Council, an organization of former senior U.S. military officials sponsored by GENSA's Jamunder Center for Defense and Strategy. As General Wald stated, we released a report last week assessing that the JCPOA will make the United States and its allies less secure and military confrontation with Iran and its proxies more likely. Specifically and fundamentally, the JCPOA will allow Iran to become a nuclear threshold state no later than 15 years. During that time, it will enable Iran to become more powerful and expand its influence not only across the Middle East and negatively impact U.S. national security. The JCPOA's lifting of economic sanctions will provide Tehran more resources for military spending, while its ending of UN arms embargo will give Iran access to advanced technologies and weapons from abroad, most likely from China and Russia. Iran will likely use these opportunities to augment its asymmetric capabilities to include anti-access, aerial denial strategy to deter or prevent our military forces from operating effectively in the Middle East. This could include more accurate anti-ship missiles, attack craft, submarines, mines, advanced air systems, UAVs, longer-range radars, enhanced EW and CW capabilities. In short order, Iran could credibly threaten to seal off the Straits of Hormuz, block the flow of oil through the Persian Gulf, and target our military forces and those of our allies. And once sanctions end on its ballistic missile program, Iran could more easily develop weapons capable of reaching targets in the Middle East and beyond, including Europe. Additionally, the JCPOA will allow Iran to funnel more money and weapons to destabilizing forces across the region, from Assad regime in Syria to Shia militias, chiefly Hezbollah, to expand involvement in Yemen and other strategic parts of the Arabian Peninsula that are vulnerable to sectarian conflict. Therefore, the JCPOA will aggravate sectarian conflict, trigger nuclear and conventional proliferation, and strange ties with our regional allies. Meanwhile, sequestration is diminishing our military's ability to deter and respond to global threats, including increased Iran aggression. Maintaining our position in the Middle East to prevent a nuclear Iran will demand increasing resources, posture, and attention, far more than is provided today. To Ranking Member Engel's point, now that we have the agreement, what next? First, we need to sustain multilateral engagement and enhance it with our Middle East allies to assemble a regional coalition to hold the line against Iran, built on greater cooperation on missile defense, intelligence, and air and maritime superiority. Second, significant diplomatic effort must be devoted to convincing Iran's most likely suppliers, mainly Russia and China, not to sell Iran advanced weapons. Third, we must develop a comprehensive national strategy to deal with Iran's growing adversarial ambitions. Finally, we must preserve our country's military edge against Iran with recapitalization, investment, and modernization of our forces. I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for my time, and I look forward to the committee's questions.
Mr. Wizir.
Thank you, Chairman Royce and Ranking Member Engel. Oh, sorry. Many critics more expert than myself have commented on the technical details of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action that the Obama administration has concluded with the Islamic Republic of Iran. In truth, it does not take an expert to understand the shortcomings of this deal, if the objective of the deal is indeed to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. Since this is an objective that the administration plainly shares, its satisfaction with an arrangement that achieves this objective only temporarily for a short period of time, while otherwise vindicating and legitimating Iran's eventual ability to weaponize its nuclear knowledge and infrastructure, is difficult to understand. From the standpoint of arms control, this deal is a respite, not a release, from our well-founded anxiety about Iran's military ambitions. A respite is only a pause, and the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action is only a pause.
It is not a reckoning with the prospect of an Iranian nuclear arsenal. It is a postponement of such a reckoning. The Iranian regime did not make a strategic decision to renounce nuclear weapons. It made a tactical decision to defer nuclear weapons so as to accomplish the strategic decision it did make, which was to escape the crushing sanctions that were the result of its nuclear adventurism. We used a lot of leverage for too little. All the ominous options must remain on the infamous table. The accord is a change in degree, not a change in kind. The dissatisfaction with the accord that I have just expressed concerns only the arms control aspects of the deal. But arms control never takes place in a political and strategic vacuum. It cannot be insulated from history or from morality. We recently learned this rather bitterly in Syria, where the confiscation of its dictator's arsenal of chemical weapons turned out to have no impact whatever upon the conduct or the outcome of this catastrophic war and its endless atrocities. In the Syrian case, indeed, the narrow focus upon arms control was a way to evade the larger moral and strategic challenges of the horrors, which this administration, its lofty rhetoric notwithstanding, has adamantly refused to face. I fear that the Iran deal is playing a similarly evasive role in the thinking of the administration. At least our adventure in arms control in Syria did not alter our contempt for its regime, even if our contempt had no practical implications for our policy. In the case of Iran, however, the deal that we have just concluded and the spirit in which we have just concluded it strongly suggests that this exercise in arms control represents something more. A revision of our troubled relationship with Iran, an attempt to establish some sort of détente with the Islamic Republic, a lovely hope that it can be reintegrated into the community of nations. The President has both confirmed and denied such an interpretation of the accord in keeping with his tactical needs of the moment. But it is hard not to intuit in this deal the hand that he extended to the Islamic Republic as long ago as his first inaugural address. For this reason, it is important that the deal be analyzed not only as arms control, but also as foreign policy. And it disappoints me as foreign policy even more than it disappoints me as arms control. It is not always the case that conflict is the result of a misunderstanding or a mistake. Sometimes conflict is a sign that differences have been properly understood. The troubled relationship of the United States with Iran should be troubled. Our previous hostility to the Islamic Republic was not based on a misreading of the Islamic Republic in its conduct within its borders or beyond its borders. When one speaks about an unfree country, when one says the word Iran, for example, one may be referring either to its government or to its people, but one may not be referring to both because they are not on the same side. An expression of friendship toward a dictatorship is an expression of enmity or indifference toward its people. The President, when he speaks about Iran, likes to believe that he is speaking about its people, but in practice, it is the regime to whom his hand has been warmly extended. The text of the accord states that we will submit a resolution to the Security Council, quote, expressing a desire to build a new relationship with Iran, close quote. Not a new relationship with a new Iran, but a new relationship with this Iran, with a criminal, oppressive, theocratic, belligerent, corrupt, anti-American, anti-Semitic, misogynistic, and homophobic regime that is consecrated not only to its God, but also to thwarting American allies and interests and principles everywhere and remorselessly sponsoring terrorism. What Democrat, what pluralist, what liberal, what conservative, what believer, what non-believer, what American would want this Iran for a friend? What constructive role can this Iran, yes, I know it is opposed to ISIS, play in the community of nations? And what constructive role can it play toward its own people? When the sanctions are lifted and Iran is economically rewarded for limited and passing concessions on its enrichment program, it will, of course, use some of the windfall to intensify its mischief abroad, about which more in a moment, and it will use the rest of its windfall to strengthen its economy. But we have no reason to think that opening up an economy has the effect of opening up a society. There is a great deal of saddening but serious evidence that economic liberalization need not entail political liberalization. We hear a lot about a contest in Tehran between hardliners and moderates, as we have in previous periods of wishful thinking about Iran. But it is important to remember that political conflict in Iran takes place within an absolutist structure of power in which supreme authority rests with a single individual who rules by divine sanction. If the Ayatollah and the IRGC have not opened up their society, it is not because they lack the cash. Consider also the Iranian regime's foreign policy. During the period of our negotiations with Iran, Iran was intervening furiously to inflame the Shia in Iraq, to prop up Bashar al-Assad in Syria, to support Hezbollah in Lebanon, and to arm Hamas in Gaza. Its regional aggressions, which were directed at American interests and American allies, were uninhibited by a fear of offending the United States during a delicate negotiation about an issue of the highest importance. We, by contrast, inhibited ourselves in all these places. We stayed our hands for many reasons, but one of them was a worry about damaging our nuclear diplomacy with Iran. The lessons of the 1970s and 1980s, when the United States had the wisdom and the courage to press the Soviet Union all at once about arms control and human rights and proxy wars, were lost on our president. And there is also the question, or rather the cause, of Israel. The Islamic Republic's ceaseless calls for the extermination of the Jewish state must not be treated as some sort of foible or eccentricity that makes us sigh as we get on with the really important business. It should disgust us as a nation, and our disgust should take the form of policy. Whatever one thinks of Israel's methods in intervening in the American debate, or of its actions and inactions toward the Palestinians, it would be indecent not to understand Israel's anguish at the prospect of the nuclearization of a state that arms its enemies and is eager for its destruction. From the standpoint of foreign policy, then, the nuclear accord disturbs me because it will almost certainly invigorate a contemptible and bellicose regime. And so I propose that in the aftermath of the accord, we proceed to do whatever we can to weaken that regime. The adoption of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action should be accompanied by a resumption of our hostility to the Iranian regime and its various forces. The suggestion is not as paradoxical as it sounds. Diplomats like to say that you talk with your enemies. They are right, and we have talked with them, but they are still our enemies. We need to restore democratization to its pride of place among the priorities of our foreign policy, and to oppress the theocrats in Tehran everywhere with expressions in word and deed of our implacable opposition to their war on their own people. We need to support Iranian dissidents in any way we can, not least so that they do not feel abandoned and alone. And we must indefatigably demand the release of Mousavi and Kairoubi from the house arrest in which they have been sealed since the regime's crackdown on the Democratic Rebellion of 2009, on which our government turned its back. And how in good conscience could we have proceeded with these negotiations while an innocent American journalist was held captive in an Iranian jail? We need to despise the Iranian regime loudly and regularly and damage its international position as fiercely as we can for its desire to destroy Israel. We need to degrade by sanctions and other means the more dangerous elements of Iran's conventional arsenal. And we need to arm the enemies of Iran in Syria and Iraq, and therefore offer a consequential obstacle to Iran's plain-as-day campaign to attain regional hegemony. But even as I say these words, my heart sinks, because I know that this administration will not accept such activist prescriptions. And yet it is not just the Obama administration that has preferred a diminution of America's presence in the world. When it comes to asserting American power as a force for security and justice, of recognizing the legitimacy and the necessity of American interventions against evils that offend our interests and our values, and of recognizing, too, that there are many courses of action that fall between Obama's lassitude and Bush's shock and awe, when it comes to articulating a right and fierce sense of America's responsibility in the world, neither Democrats nor Republicans have exactly covered themselves in glory in recent years. The adoption of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action would be an appropriate occasion for opening a new discussion of the first principles of our foreign policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wieseltier. I have a question for you, and it goes to this issue of looking back in time at what has worked. And you're right in terms of the difficulty in finding an effective approach to changing these types of totalitarian regimes. But in the 1980s, I was part of an exchange program that was partly in Eastern Europe. And I watched the combination of strategy, bringing down the price of oil, then to $10 a barrel. The focus on what could be done in terms of broadcasting with Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, which was much, much different. I mean, it was a lesson plan in political tolerance, in political pluralism. It was taking a society that was 2-to-1 opposed to the totalitarian regime and ratcheting it up until it was 3-to-1 or 4-to-1 in opposition. What's interesting to me is that for the last generation in Iran, people have been 2-to-1 against the theocracy. The last Gallup poll I saw, when they asked the question, what type of system do you want? They said a Western-style democracy without a theocracy. That was the will of 2/3 of the people. Now, when you have a theocracy, when you have a totalitarian regime, that's not enough to get you there, from our experience with Eastern Europe. But if you ratchet that up, you can get there. And I think the frustration for many of us was the failure to deploy. I mean, now it's dysfunctional, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. That's dysfunctional. Support for the opposition, non-existent. 2009, when the students were protesting, they did not feel that the United States was on their side in that debate, nor was the broadcasting on their side during that debate, or on social media on their side during that debate. So the question for me would go to your observation, you know, the parallel with the Dreyfus affair, when you say you learned that there are times when an injustice to only one man deserves to bring things to a halt. In Iran today, there is an injustice not just to those being held in Evin prison, not just to the American you speak to, but to a whole society. How do we empower that society? I don't think it's with this agreement, because I think this agreement, in fact, empowers the IRGC and the Ayatollah. But how do we empower those people?
Let me say 4 quick points about that. Thank you for your remarks. The first one is this. If it is indeed the case, as the defenders of the deal say, that it is in the rational interest of the Iranian government to renounce nuclear weapons, and if it is indeed the case that the Iranian regime is the rational actor that those defenders describe, and if it is indeed the case that the Iranian regime would like to be reintroduced into the so-called community of nations, then we set our goals too modestly. We had certain prior assumptions about Iranian flexibility, and it is not at all clear to me that they were ipso facto true. And those assumptions were based on a whole variety of things having to do with the administration's larger views about foreign policy and America's role in the world that we can talk about at another time or later. Secondly, it's very important to remember that democratization is not an event, it's an era. It takes a very long time. It took a long time in Central and Eastern Europe under communism. It took a long time. One of the mistakes or illusions created by the Iraq War was that we can simply send in a bunch of troops, fly our Air Force, and we would have a parliamentary system overnight. That is not how a society living in tyranny and repression becomes free. And when you emancipate people, when you make them free, you emancipate the actually existing people, and those are people who have not had experience of democracy. So we must keep our heads and regard this as a policy for the long term. Thirdly, there are many instruments available to the United States in the support of Democrats and dissidents everywhere. This debate, not in this room right now, but generally, the Iranian nuclear debate, the administration's approach to this, has been a terribly Manichaean picture in which it is either this particular deal or a catastrophic war. The United States is the greatest power in the world with a vast variety of instruments that it can deploy at all levels: soft power, soft versions of hard power, and even hard versions of hard power. But we are not helpless in this. And fourth, it's very important to understand that when I say that we must support dissidents and Democrats in countries, I say this, when I talk about democratization, I mean that we must support the forces where they already exist indigenously. One of the problems with our Iraq strategy was that we went in to topple a dictator who, God knows, who was illegitimate and dangerous and had used chemical weapons against his people, whatever one thinks about that war. But we did not go in to support an indigenous force. In Syria, there was an indigenous force. I fear it may have been wiped out. The administration may actually have fulfilled its inaction, may have fulfilled its worst prophecies. In Iran, Iran is, of all the examples, Iran is a state, a tyrannical state with a social basis for an open society, if ever there was one. And there is a robust community of Democrats and dissidents in Iran that the United States, I think, has not only a moral obligation to support, but also an intensely strategic obligation to support, because I can think of no greater prize geopolitically in the region and beyond than a change of regime in Tehran.
Thank you, Mr. Wiesenhuber. My time's expired. We're going to Mr. Elliot Engel of New York.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In my opening remarks, I mentioned that one of the things that troubled me about this agreement was the fact that the new UN Security Council Resolution 2231, which accompanies the JPOA, lifts the arms embargo on Iran after 5 years and ballistic missile sanctions after 8 years. So I'd like to ask Admiral Fallon, what are the strategic implications of lifting these particular sanctions? And are there redundant measures in place that the United States can rely on that will prevent Iran from introducing further instability into the region?
Mr. Engel, who knows? We could speculate all day long. There's been an awful lot of that about every aspect of this deal. In my view, the most important thing is that Iran is very close, by pretty much consensus, to achieving a nuclear weapon. If they do that, I guess step back for a second and put this in perspective. There's no comparison in total power between Iran and the United States. We are not in, they're not in the same league with us. However, they acquire a nuclear weapon that gives them significant leverage to blackmail us and others against doing things in this region or other places that could be destabilizing. So it seems to me that if you stack the priorities in what we would like to do here, this keep the weapon out of their hands now is, in my view, far superior to the others, and that's what the objective is here. So there are all kinds of other things. If I had a clean sheet and could have all my desires, we wouldn't have included any release of ballistic missile technology or access to other weapons and a long list of things that, from our perspective, we'd like to see implemented. That's not realistic. Absolutely not realistic, in my opinion. So what we're trying to do is to forestall the imminent potential of a nuclear weapon. There are only two ways to get there, by my understanding of the physics. One is through uranium. We've removed, if this plan is agreed to and executed, remove that pile of uranium, enriched uranium. And the second is plutonium. And if the plant's not functioning, it's not very easy or likely they're going to build another heavy water plant anytime soon. So to me, when you look at the alternatives, give me a real one. I've heard a lot of talk. Most of it is speculation and hand-wringing about what could happen. Who knows what could happen? But think of a couple things, if you would, please, members. 15 years, that's almost a generation. And that's basically what the deal is trying to buy. pushing this off that amount of time. The flip side, I don't know of any people that are particularly thrilled with the leadership in Tehran. I certainly have no love for them whatsoever based on observed behavior up front and personal. But 15 years from now, Khamenei is going to be, if he's alive, 91. Do you think he's going to be ruling that country? This is a country where 50% of the population is under the age of 30. I mean, you can feel it from here. They want change. So who knows what's going to happen? I think we could speculate all day long. It seems to me that we ought to be focused on the most important thing, and that is let's stop the drive to a nuclear weapon now.
If anyone else cares to answer, it would seem to me, though, if we are looking to help the Iranian people have a more democratic regime, are we more likely to do it when Iran is awash in cash, as this agreement will do, or are we more likely to have it if the Iranian economy, currency, and other things are struggling because they have a hold on monies that they have? So, Vice Admiral, General
Would you like me to
Leon,
take a shot at that first?
yeah.
Or? So,
Sure.
The amount of money has also been debated. Who knows, 50 billion or 100 billion? But in the big scheme of things, Iran seems to have done a pretty fair job of funding their ongoing activities around the world that we find pretty nefarious. So I'm not sure what this infusion of cash might result in, but I know one thing, it's almost certain, and that is if this place opens up and you get the kind of economic activity that appears to be poised to, try to get a flight into Tehran from some European capital today, this country's going to open up. What that means for the future remains to be seen. But the idea that it's going to stay a closed society, I don't think it's going to happen. So this offers an opportunity to change that.
Leon?
I just wanted to make a remark about this notion that one hears everywhere now, that one must support the deal because there is no alternative. I never quite understood this point. In the first place, if a plan does not furnish a solution to the problem that it sets out to solve, then it is itself not a real alternative and not a satisfactory alternative. The debate is about whether or not it does. But the idea that because it's the only plan there is, we must support it, makes no sense to me if we come honestly to the conclusion that it is a bad plan. And secondly, the argument that there is no alternative, this deal is a respite of 10 years and 15 years, and we're told there's no alternative. But the same could have been said about a respite of 7 years and 12 years, or 3 years and 8 years, or 6 months and a year. The idea that there is no alternative could be used to justify any deal. I think that the most important, the obligation we have is to judge the deal on its own merits, considering all its dimensions. And if we conclude that it is a bad deal, then I think people have to vote on their conscience about it.
I see my time is up, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Engel. Eliana Ross-Layton of Florida.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. And the ranking member, I'm going to follow up on the excellent points that they had made. We had heard from some of our witnesses today that as a result of this influx of sanctions relief cash, which Mr. Engel was talking about, and a strengthening economy, that Iran will be more powerful and more militarily capable. Of course, this also means that Iran will have more money to support terror and its proxies like Hezbollah and Hamas. If Iran right now and up to now has found the money, even under these tightest of sanctions, to fund its support for terror, do you believe that this influx, this new influx of funds, will really go to help the domestic economy like the administration has been portraying? And furthermore, how can an emboldened Iranian military undermine our interest in the Gulf and in the Strait of Hormuz? And we've also heard that as a result of this deal, we will have to increase cooperation with our partners in the region militarily. And how would we do that? Through increased arms sales. But this can prove to be quite problematic. Is it possible that allowing Iran's military capability to build up, and by us simultaneously arming Gulf countries in the region to the teeth, could this actually lead to another war and also make it more difficult for the U.S. to be able to respond? And how is it in our national interest in the region to have a conventional arms race and a nuclear arms race now that these countries have seen us allow Iran to keep its capability to enrich uranium? And how would this arms buildup threaten Israel's security and Israel's qualitative military edge? And I agree with you, sir, when the administration is calling those of us who oppose this deal, which is the bipartisan majority of Congress and the American public, warmongers. Yet if this deal goes through, the United States will be responsible for the mass proliferation of conventional and nuclear weapons in the region. Lots of questions.
Yeah,
General?
I'll answer that. First of all, I think your points are excellent. I'd like to just make a personal comment. I don't think there'd be anything better for us today in this world if we could ensure Iran didn't have a nuclear weapon. I don't like that idea at all. The concern I have about the deal is that we haven't talked about the after the deal, what we're going to do. And the idea that Iran now is going to have $100 billion, $50 billion, I don't care, $50 billion is a lot more than they have now to modernize their capability, and they will, is bothersome to me as a military person. Number two is, I think the idea that this deal is going to preclude war, I don't think the deal or not a deal is going to preclude war. I think it's a matter of how Iran acts. And they have demonstrated the desire to cause problems in the Middle East. This issue with Hezbollah that the ranking member brought up is not trivial. 100,000, we've heard it's 100,000 missiles that are pointed at Israel. Number two is modernizing their intercontinental ballistic missile or regional missile capability is going to be hugely problematic for not just the GCC states, but the United States as a partner. Verification. I don't know how we're going to really assure that we have a good verification regime with the way the wording of the agreement has been stated. The fact that they're going to have 24 days to do whatever they want, the fact we can't go to their military facilities, I mean, we're going to need a strong verification regime that we do not have, and we should assure that before we do this. You know, again, you can say what you want to. Colin Powell was on TV Sunday talking about the Iraq invasion based on intelligence. We didn't have a clue what Iraq had at that point, and we were putting a lot of effort into it. And you don't think we put a lot of effort into Iran? We don't have an idea for sure what they're doing. And they'll cheat. They will cheat. There's no doubt about it. Number three is, I think we need to continue to increase, as you pointed out, our support to our allies in the region. The GCC states, and we need to expect them to have us be participatory in a regional missile defense regime with them, not just part-time, full-time. Israel, we need to beef up Israel's air defense capability. They shouldn't have 4 or 5 Iron Domes. They ought to have 30 Iron Domes. And the fact of the matter, unless Iran is deterred, they are going to cause havoc in the region. They don't just want to be a nuclear power. They want to be a regional hegemon.
Thank you
Having
very
them
much.
get $100 billion to modernize their capability is a bad idea.
Thank you, sir. I agree. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member.
Thank you. We now go to Mr. Brad Sherman of California.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, a lot of discussion. Is this a good deal? Is this a bad deal? It's not our job here to grade the President of the United States or his predecessors. That's the job of talk show hosts, pundits, ultimately historians. Our job here is to guide the House of Representatives. How can the House make a positive contribution to this nation's foreign policy under today's conditions, not the conditions that existed a month ago or a year ago? A month ago when we left Washington, some believed that the House and the Senate might immediately affect our foreign policy under the Corker bill by passing a binding resolution of disapproval over the President's veto and preventing the President from delivering some portion of the sanctions relief promised in Vienna. Whether that was ever in the cards then, we know it's not in the cards now. The House cannot prevent the president from delivering the sanctions relief called for by the agreement. 34 senators, with 7 to spare, have already announced their position. Now, we might want to live in a fantasy world. In my fantasy world, the Ayatollah is about to convert to Christianity. In the fantasy world of others, a joint resolution of disapproval is about to be passed over the president's veto by both houses by a 2/3 majority. We're not here to live in a fantasy world. What are the points we can all agree on? Believe it or not, there are points, and this has been a contentious debate, we can all agree on. First, as I pointed out, this deal is going to go into effect for the next year and a half. Whether it goes through after a veto or before a veto, the world will not remember for very long. The second thing we can all agree on is that the nuclear safeguards in this deal are much better in this decade than they are next decade. We know what America's foreign policy will be until 2017. We do not know what is in our national interest in 2017 or 2027. As Admiral Fallon said, there's just no way to know. So the greatest contribution this House can make is to preserve America's freedom of action, dealing with circumstances we cannot predict. Even if you love this deal, the greatest proponents don't say there's a guarantee that it represents our best national interest next decade. And even if you hate this deal, you do not know what will be in our national interest next decade. What we need is freedom of action. The threat to our freedom of action is that we're the good guys. We follow international law. If something's binding, we feel bound. The House can make one contribution, and that is to demonstrate to the American people in the world that this is not a binding agreement. Now, that has the additional advantage of being true. It is not binding on America under the United States Constitution. And in the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties, this is the lowest possible executive handshake. It's not a ratified treaty. It's not an unratified treaty. It's not an executive legislative agreement. So we've got to have the clearest possible message that this agreement is not binding on the President and not binding on Congress. We are scheduled to deal with a resolution of disapproval, which, as I pointed out, will not, even if it passes, and that's problematic in the Senate, it'll be vetoed. Ultimately, it will be defeated. Maybe only by 34% of one House, but it will be defeated. There are 3 other approaches we could take that would make a clearer statement. We could have a concurrent resolution of disapproval that doesn't go to the President's desk. We could have a House resolution of disapproval that doesn't even go to the Senate. Or we could vote on, as provided in the Corker bill, on a resolution of approval, and it would be voted down. Those would be clearer statements than where we're headed now, which is ultimately a victory for the proponents of the deal. But I don't run the House. None of us on this side of this aisle run the House. We will vote on those matters that are brought to the floor, and we've got to vote in a way that preserves freedom of action. The President has the freedom of action for the rest of his term. That's guaranteed by the votes in the Senate. Now we have to preserve freedom of action for future presidents under future circumstances. I yield back.
We go now to Joe Wilson of South Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you. I want to thank the ranking member, Elliott Engel, the courage that you've had over the last month as the American people find out more about this deal. They find out how dangerous it is, the thought of that there would be self-inspection. It's inconceivable of putting the American people at risk, putting the Middle East at risk, putting our military at risk. And I have 4 sons currently serving the military today. And so it's, I take it personally that indeed our American military is put at risk by working with a country that provided the IEDs that killed so many of our troops, and how we can forget 1983, the attack on the Marine barracks in Beirut, which was a direct attack by Iran, killing nearly 300 Marines. And people should know that that bomb explosion was the largest explosive device since Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And then just 3 years ago, this regime, a murderous regime, was attempting to blow up and kill the ambassador from Saudi Arabia to the United States. And so for us to be dealing with Islamo-fascists as if they're trustworthy is utterly inconceivable. There has been one highlight to me, though, of this debate right here. I had the opportunity to be here with Senator Joseph Lieberman. This is bipartisan. He expressed heartfelt belief that the deal should be defeated and that it should be overridden. And I had the opportunity to be with him in New York. And so as I think back to where we are, and General Wall, a concern that I have is that with the lifting of the military sanctions, in addition to unfrozen funds estimated, let's take the numbers. Can you imagine? 50 billion, 100 billion, 150 billion dollars. That's a lot of money. What will this do for Iran's well-documented support of terrorism and destabilization across the globe? Could you please speak to these concerns and what impact this will have on the overall security chaos that's currently in the Middle East, and how does this affect American families at home?
Thank you. Well, I go back again. I agree with your comments. I think from my perspective, as a military person who spent a lot of time in the Middle East, I was in charge at the beginning of the Afghan war that I thought was pretty successful. I've been to the Middle East 45 times. I have close friends there. I've been to Israel 40 times. My concern about the deal is that I don't believe we have a strong verification process, and that worries me. And if we don't have a strong verification process, something that isn't necessarily even that much greater than we have today, that's not a good thing. On the other side, for that ability for Iran to have this lifting of the sanctions, they're going to have the money to, as you point out, modernize their military. Their military has been problematic for us anyway over the last 30 years. I mean, back in the 1990s, we had a reflagging of friendly shipping through the region called Earnest Will. The United States Navy escorted every ship through the Straits of Hormuz because of the threat of the Iranian missiles, the Scuds from Bandar Abbas. They don't have the ability to actually threaten our air today because they haven't had the ability to modernize their air capability. They don't have surface-to-air missiles that are worth a darn. With this money they're going to have released, they'll be able to modernize their air defense, as Admiral Byrd mentioned, their anti-access. They'll be able to modernize their Air Force. They'll be able to modernize their missile capability. I will guarantee you that they're not going to sit idle in the Persian Gulf. And the irony is we're actually putting ourselves in a more difficult position militarily by allowing themselves to modernize. We don't have a verification regime to I think would pay that off. So that's my concern.
And I also am very, very concerned, Admiral Byrd, that it's my understanding that the funding for Hezbollah with the missile capability, rocket capability to strike Israel, that it's currently being funded at $200 million a year. So if you have $50 billion, what will be the consequence?
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. And I agree with what General Wald said. As Admiral Fallon and other members point out, we're very unsure as to what Iran might do and what the breakout period is with respect to nuclear weapons. What we're not unsure about is what they intend to do with additional resources. They have more or less announced that they see this deal very narrowly, only dealing with their nuclear infrastructure. My sense is it's a delay of game until they ultimately get a nuclear weapon. What it's not a delay of is the money they will fund toward Hezbollah, to their military capabilities. And given a total expense of $16 billion for their military defense, any infusion of capital to the tune of 50 or 100 billion would be dramatic. At the same time, the technology associated with ballistic missiles asymmetric threats that I spoke of is increasing somewhat organically to Iran, but certainly on the export market. So there's no doubt that Iran would get greater access to arms, ballistic missiles, submarines, attack aircraft, and the like, and funnel it to Hezbollah as well as their mainstream Navy and armed forces, and be very problematic for the United States Navy, for the United States military in the Gulf.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Albio Series of New Jersey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this hearing, and thank you for being here. You know, I'm one of those people that is very concerned about the time, the 10 to 15 years. And as I look at this region, it's this region with thousands of years of history. They've seen countries come and go. And I look at these hardliners in Iran, and they're saying, well, this deal may go, but we're going to be here after this deal is done. And I can just see them positioning themselves when this is gone. When you spoke about the Ayatollah, and 10, 15 years, going to be 90, 91 years old. Well, there is a succession, and all these countries have it. You know, look at China, hardlines. There's a succession there. I look at some of these other countries, Vietnam, there's a succession there. You know, I look at my own country where I was born, Cuba, there's a succession there. So to me, 10, 15 years, a blink of an eye in a part of the world that's been around for thousands of years. And furthermore, I really do think that all these other countries around that do not trust Iran, there's going to be a nuclear arms race, or there's going to be an effort, because they do not trust Iran that eventually they're not going to develop a bomb. And they have a history of not trusting each other. So to me, I don't get it. And, you know, and I hate the fact that when I say, you know, I have these concerns, people somehow label me as a warmonger. I mean, is most of America a warmongering country? So, do you anticipate that this is going to lead to an arms race? Mr. Washington?
Oh, I think that, you know, in life, time is a very strange thing. Some things feel long and some things feel short. I think that 15 years is a young person's idea of a long time. I mean, I think it's no time at all. Moreover, I think that the burden of proof about the nature, the future character of the Iranian regime and the future behavior of the Iranian regime falls on those who believe for some reason that it's going to change and moderate itself. And I see no reason to. I think this regime is intensely committed to its own preservation. It believes, as I said, that it actually believes that it rules by divine sanction. I believe that the Revolutionary Guards, which, as someone noted, are intimately involved and corrupt a great part of the Iranian economy, is also intensely committed to its own fascistic control over large sectors of Iranian society. These are not actors that will move aside voluntarily or who will one day read Jefferson and Madison and come to their senses. That's not how it's going to happen. The only way it will happen is because the Iranian society is full of many good, liberal-leaning, liberal in the larger term, Western-leaning, democratizing people. There is, as I said, a social basis for a new regime in Tehran. A new regime in Tehran is not something that the United States can or should bring about on its own, but it is something that if there is movement within the Iranian people, within the country of Iran, it is something that I believe American foreign policy must make it one of its priorities to support. We have to keep our heads here. It's going to take a while. It's going to take, but there were people for a very long time who told us that the Soviet Union was immortal. It would not fall. And indeed, it did fall. Not because we brought it down, but because we helped.
But it took a long time.
You know, there's no way around this. There's no fast forwarding.
No, I agree with you.
There's no fast forwarding history. What worries me about this deal and about certain other aspects of the Obama administration that we've gone backwards in this regard and not forward.
Thank you. I just want to ask Admiral Fallon, how do you justify the fact that most of the country does not agree with this deal? I mean,
Well, first thing is we have all kinds of attributional statements that I've heard here today and in the media that I think have little basis in fact. You know, they're opinions. Everybody's got an opinion. If I could go back to Leah on one thing, just so you don't characterize me in the no alternative group, we have lots of alternatives. My issue is show me one that actually might achieve something that this thing looks like it's got a pretty good chance to do. I would invite us to step back from this a little bit and look at the bigger picture. This plan is just what it is. A plan, it's long, 149 pages, whatever it is. This is not the end of the world. This is not a ship casting off and going to sea, never to be seen again. This is just a step in a process. And as someone who ground his teeth and shed more than a few tears at my people who were killed as a direct result of Iranian actions in Lebanon, in Iraq, you know, this is not some abstract nonsense. But at some point in time, we have got to, in my view, look at the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is this region, the Middle East, is very unstable. It's very insecure. And the thing that appears to instigate the most instability is the hand-wringing concern about Iranian nuclear weapons. And so, you know, I invite you to look at the technical aspects of this thing. It's going to be very difficult to continue an uranium enrichment program or plutonium. How are they going to get the bomb out of it? Is it going to drop out of the sky? Yeah, they could. I mean, you could speculate all kinds of things. They could get one from Pakistan. But I think the bigger issue here is we need to focus on the most immediate thing and recognize that it's going to be a many-step evolution. The implementation of this thing is really hard. You think this is hard? In my view, start working through the details of the implementation. And this is where the Congress, in my opinion, can really help. So, you know, it's at some point in time, in every dispute, it seems to me, if you're going to make progress, you got to kind of suck it up and say, you know, I don't like this. So the comment that Congressman Wilson made, you know, have we forgotten the Marine barracks? I sure haven't. I was there.
Time's expired. We're going to
know,
Mr. Darrell Issa of
you gotta
California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Just make a real quick comment on that last point real quick before we leave it. I think it's ironic that Admiral Fallon, who's a friend of mine, would say the biggest issue here is this instability in the Middle East. And the nuclear weapon is an issue, but that other parts of it are even more important. And in fact, this deal is going to give Iran the ability to make the Middle East a lot more unstable. And it's ironic to me that everybody that says if you don't like the deal, you're a warmonger, you want to blow up Iran. I'd like to avoid any conflict. But I'll guarantee you, Iran, with the money they're going to get from the sanctions lifting, is going to change the dynamic in the Middle East significantly. And I'll tell you another thing, and Congressman Royce knows this. Robert Mugabe, we keep saying he's going to die any day. He's going to live forever. I mean, the idea you're going to wait till somebody dies to change some kind of policy is not a very good way to go.
Can I make a small
We've got to go to Mr. Darrell Issa of California. I'm sure we'll come back to some of these arguments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have lived to ask my questions. How many of you on the panel know or have visited the Trinity site in New Mexico? Okay, so for those who haven't visited it, that was the first successful nuclear explosion. Occurred in July of 1945. How many of you know how many years after we began the Manhattan Project that bomb went off? Well, August 13th, we just had the 73rd anniversary. It was less than 3 years at a time when computers mostly ticked because relays were clicking, that it took us only 3 years to produce a nuclear weapon. That concerns me every bit as much as 37 years of Ayatollah after Ayatollah murdering Americans and our allies around the world and spreading terrorism. So I want to ask just a couple of questions. And Admiral Fallon, you know, you generals and admirals are all friends up there, but I consider you a friend. But today I've got to ask you some tough questions. So I'll put it this way, Bill. Have you read all the side agreements?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Well,
by
the agreements
side-
that are not part of the deal that's being presented to Congress.
If you're getting at the two so-called secret protocols,
Yes, sir.
I guess. No, I haven't read them.
So
But
can,
I guess
can,
could I-
can any of us make a fully educated understanding of this deal without knowing the deal in its entirety? I'm not saying that every part of it is something that Congress has to oversee, but whether it's the IEA or any other side agreements that are there, if we're going to approve what is effectively a treaty, why is it that anyone can reach a conclusion if we haven't seen the entire deal?
Yeah,
And I'll ask each of you that question.
Okay, first, if I could comment, it's not a treaty, and there's, I think, a lot of
It
reasons.
is effectively a treaty.
It's not a treaty.
Okay, let's put it this way. It effectively changes our role in a way in which we treat a absolute enemy of this state who still occupies our embassy in Tehran with its foreign students and Revolutionary Guard types. They still occupy that illegally as we speak today. They are still a terrorist state. They're still a state that doesn't recognize international law, and we now are going to allow them 5 years from now to get ICBMs. So the answer to your question that you asked rhetorically is, how are they going to drop the bomb? Well, in 5 years, they're going to drop the bomb with an ICBM they're fully allowed to buy.
Well, I'd be very much more concerned about the coercive effect in the next year or 2 years. But back to your original question, this additional protocol, I don't know what the exact language is, but I think what's noteworthy about it is that this is a voluntary expansion, as I understand it, of Iran agreeing to allow the IA to look at things that heretofore had not been looked at. It might be noteworthy that this is not a typical thing. This thing is, and there's a separate agreement on parts, and that's the second part of it. And why would we be interested? And why the IA? You know why? Because bad behavior in the past.
Okay, well, let me switch my question.
Nobody's agreed to it before.
Okay,
This is the first time.
Yeah, no, let me switch. First of all, my understanding is all they're agreeing to do is what they've already agreed to do by protocol for years and refused to do. The sites they're prohibiting are sites they have prohibited in violation of agreements they already signed. But let me just ask the fundamental question. And I was in the Sinai over the break. I saw the Boko Haram problem in Nigeria. These are areas outside of what we talk about every day, but they're part of the spreading Islamic activities on both the Sunni and Shia side that are beginning to dominate more and more of the world. So seeing all of that, I only ask one question. Why should Congress agree to any deal that allows one of the major protagonists to have $140 billion more that is clearly going to be used to spread their agenda of their Shia caliphate in opposition to a Sunni caliphate, in opposition to the Western world agreement to let people live in peace, including the Christians in the Arab and Muslim world? I'll just go down the line, Dr. Ward, or General Ward.
We shouldn't. Period.
The answer to that one is that we've had 36 years of Zippo except headbutting. At some point in time, it's in our national interest to try to do something to stabilize this region. We don't like these guys. They don't like us. We don't trust them. What else is new? But at some point in time, we've got to actually take a step forward.
And
We're the big
I want to
donor.
quickly just get through the other two. Where do you stand on this, Admiral?
We should not.
My own view is that whereas one should take risks for peace, one shouldn't be played for a fool. And I worry that we're being played for fools here because the windfall of this money, these are matters of history. We know what the Iranian regime believes in. We know how it has behaved beyond its borders. I see absolutely no reason to believe that this windfall will not impact its adventures beyond its borders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Issa. We go now to Mr. Ted Deutsch of Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Fallon, I just wanted to follow up on that last exchange. When you said that at some point we have to try to do something to stabilize the region, it seems to me there's just not a response that to the very real concern that I think critics and supporters of the deal acknowledge, that money flowing to this regime. Some portion of it is going to go to Hezbollah and Hamas and other terrorist groups. They will use that to further destabilize the regime. And so we can have a debate about what happens at the end of this deal. And I agree with Mr. Wieseltier that this is really just a pause, but that's a separate issue. In the short term, the money, the lifting of the arms embargo, the ability to conduct ballistic missile research, all of that will make the region, I think, less secure. It will destabilize the region, number one. And number two, from an arms control perspective, for all of us who really are concerned about nuclear proliferation, I fail to understand how, with this, once this deal goes forward, how it is that if the Saudis or Turkey or Egypt come to us, come to the United States and say, you know what, we just want that. We'll take the Iran deal. We'll take all of the limitations, the limits on centrifuges, the duration, but we'll take the deal that at the end of 10 years or 15 years gives us the ability to have an unlimited nuclear capacity. How do we possibly say no to that? I don't understand how we could possibly reject that once this deal is in place.
Well, I'm not sure, to your last point, that anybody's lining up to, back to the first
It's not
thing.
whether they are, it's whether they could. And
Well, you could-
that's
a lot of
always
things.
the debate about
We
nuclear
could speculate all day long about what could, many things could, but back to a couple of realities here. No sanction relief at all until Iran demonstrates
Admiral Fallon,
that
I only,
the
I'm sorry, I only have a couple
uranium and
minutes.
plutonium pieces are done.
No, and I'm going to
So
have
it's
to
a
go.
stair
I'm going to have
step.
to. I want to change in a second, but I understand what has to be done. I'm very familiar with the deal. But the question is, when they satisfy their requirements to
Right.
get access to billions of dollars, that will destabilize the region.
In the near term, who knows what they're going to do with the money? Wouldn't surprise them at all. But you know,
Okay,
one of the ironic
that's
things
all I
about
wanted.
this,
No, that's all I wanted to
Yeah, but-
confirm.
but,
I
you
want-
know,
no,
I
no,
think
Admiral
taking
Fallon,
this thing in
Admiral Fallon,
isolation
I only
just
have limited time.
wastes
Mr.
time.
Wieseltier, let me. I was just hoping someone would finally acknowledge that. We can have a debate about this deal and long-term where it goes. In the short term, there will be more ability, a greater ability for Iran to destabilize, and there will be more violence. That should be our concern. We at least have to acknowledge it, and I appreciate it. Mr. Wieseltier, I want to get back to your point about the regime, anti-American, anti-Semitic, homophobic, misogynistic. How do we, what should be our role?
Speaking politely, of course.
I understand, and and that was only a short,
Yes.
brief listing of what you included. How do we make, what should our foreign policy look like in a way to make it clear that a regime which makes being gay punishable by death, for example, a regime that, well, you've listed them all. I mean, how do we make clear, especially at this moment as this deal is going forward, that we're not just hoping that the regime changes, but that we very clearly stand on the side of the Iranian people and not this difficult and horrible regime?
You ask the important question. We don't make it clear, of course, by immediately rushing to war with this regime. What we do begin to make it clear by including the critique of this regime and the principles upon which that critique would be based, meaning the full-throated defense of freedom, no matter how many times George W. Bush used that word, the full-throated defense of freedom, the notion that the United States will be on the side of people seeking freedom, the notion that there is a natural democratic relationship between, a natural alliance, a natural relationship between Democrats the world over and between democratic states the world over. We have, in the last 6 years, gone mute on these questions as a country. We have gone mute. We do not talk about freedom. We do not stand up to these dictators. We try to find realistic, we've specialized, we've got a new specialty, not in inaction, but in inconsequential action. This is, I think, Obama's innovation in our foreign policy. And I think that verbally and at all levels of the instruments that I described, the United States has to make it clear that it is the country to which all such people should look to as a source for hope and help. as a source for hope and help. We can argue about what kind of help. Those are interesting debates. The idea that it is not either in our interest or a fulfillment of our values to offer such societies no help and no hope, that seems to me completely untrue. Completely untrue. Yeah, that seems to me completely untrue. I just wanted to add one thing to what my friend Mr. Deutsch said earlier, to your earlier point, which is when we talk about the release of the sanction money and what I agree is the inevitable mischief that will ensue as a result of it, we could think of it a little differently. I would even be willing to consider the instability that came from the release of the sanction money if the stability that the nuclear deal brought about nuclear weapons would be real, would be long-lasting, would be permanent. That would be an interesting discussion. And that would be a miserably difficult trade-off, but it would be a trade-off that it might be worth talking about. Because the idea of an Iran that agreed to renounce nuclear weapons would be a strategic victory of the highest order. But in an agreement in which the Iranians do not agree to go that far, so that the nuclear instability remains, it's deferred, it's postponed, it's brought down, it's delayed, but remains historically, then the question of the impact of the released sanction money becomes even more urgent.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deutsch. We go to Mr. Weber of Texas.
Thank you. This for the panel, basically the deal that's before us, when it was negotiated by Secretary Kerry and others, would it have been reasonable, and hopefully this is a yes or no question for the four of you, would it have been, in your estimation, reasonable for the world's leading exporter of terror has 4 of our hostages? In your opinion, gentlemen, would it have been reasonable to say, if you're going to be serious about getting back into the world community, world neighborhood, would it have been reasonable, General Wall, to say the first thing you do as an act of good faith is give us our 4 hostages? Would that have been reasonable?
My job is to do military advice.
Okay, well, you have an opinion on it? If you don't, that's fine.
I'll give you an answer.
Okay.
I mean, from a U.S. citizen, absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, we're supposed to protect our country, and that should be reasonable. Let me just say one last thing on that real quick, and I agree with you, but when we started the negotiations, we had objectives, I believe. And I think, negotiation means compromise and you discuss. I get that. But you have to have certain core principles you got to stick with. And I think we compromise that on the way down the path.
And that's where I'm going. Admiral Fallon, reasonable or not reasonable to say as an act of good faith, give us our hostages?
Probably not reasonable.
Probably not reasonable.
And you know why?
No.
Because the priority is nuclear weapons.
Not really interested. I don't mean to sound disrespectful.
Yes,
I'm running out of time.
Very reasonable.
I think so. Mr. Weasel,
I think that by not releasing the hostages, as with their policy, their foreign policy in the region, they were defying us, and they were making it perfectly clear that the nuclear agreement would not affect the rest.
So we're debating it with an enemy who has clearly demonstrated, somebody said over 36 years, by sticking their finger in our eye, killing Americans, that they don't care about us. They believe in a culture of death, whereas we believe in a culture of life. Okay. So when the administration goes in there and says they want the best deal, and is it reasonable for them to say, we will walk away from a bad deal? Was that reasonable? I think it's reasonable. Wouldn't we all agree? If it was a bad deal, they would walk away from it. We're fixing to give them back their money. They didn't, the administration did not extract promises for them to, A, stop exporting terrorism, stop the rhetoric on the United States and Israel must be destroyed, to stop supplying weapons over to Assad and Syria, exporting terrorism, if you want to get technical. So I don't think that it was reasonable when John Kerry said, and I've got a letter from him here dated September the 2nd. He talks about you need to vote for this bill and all this good things are going to happen. And then he goes into on page 2 of this bill, and he basically defines, well, we're going to plus up Israel's military capability. We're going to plus up people in the region, their military capability. Now, can you say arms race? Can you say that the destabilizing of that region is not going to get better, it's going to get worse? And to my friend Ted Deutsch's comments earlier about if these other countries come to us and say, we want nuclear power, how do we tell them that we have an administration who will not give energy companies over here a permit to build a nuclear power plant, but they will take American tax dollars and build one for our enemies. Gentlemen, I want to submit to you, that's not reasonable. John Kerry and company, in my estimation, didn't use reason to get to this position. And so I understand the futility of thinking that somehow I can, and those that support this deal, I'm sorry if this sounds crass, if they've bought into that hook, line, and sinker, we can't reason somebody out of a position that they didn't use reason to get into. Yes or no? General Wall, bad deal?
Again, I'm not a politician. I will just say from a military perspective, this is not putting us in a better position.
I'm going to get to a point. Admiral Fallon, I take it you think it's yes because you said we got to do something after 36
I said
years.
it's given the alternative.
Okay.
I mean,
War is not the only alternative. We should have negotiated from power and strength. Vice Admiral Byrd.
Yes, sir, I think it's a bad deal.
Bad deal. I don't buy the idea that somehow war is the only other alternative. We should have reason. If you go back to World War II, Hitler violated the Treaty of Versailles in 1935 and began to plus up his military. The British signed a pact with him allowing him to do that, to rebuild the Luftwaffe, to rebuild their navy, and as a result, the British had to withdraw from the Baltic area. We are in the process of doing the exact same thing with the Iranian regime.
Thank you.
Chair, I yield back.
Thank you so much, sir. Dr. Barrow.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. As the chairman stated, this is our 30th hearing on this topic. I've had multiple individual meetings with passionate supporters of the deal and folks that are very concerned with the deal. And individuals have asked me, how come you haven't taken a position? Because this is a very important negotiation, and it is a very important crossroads. And there are both merits to this deal, and there are shortcomings to the deal. And it is incredibly important, I think, as Admiral Fallon has pointed out. We do have to think about how we move forward, though, in terms of a very unstable region. The goal of this negotiation was to reduce or eliminate Iran's nuclear threat. As Secretary Kerry has pointed out, as multiple folks have pointed out, both in classified and unclassified settings, at a minimum, it does reduce the threat for 15 years. And where, in this hearing, it's been pointed out, Iran is fairly close to being a threshold state at this juncture, if they're not already a threshold state. So I think that's a goal that has been achieved. Goal number 2, is there enough in this verification regime? I think as Secretary Moniz, both personally to me as well as in this committee, has indicated, he is satisfied on the nuclear issue that there is enough in the verification regime that if Iran does cheat on the nuclear issue, that they will get caught. Goal number 3, and a concern of mine was, is there immediate sanctions relief? Is there a signing bonus? Again, as Secretary Liu has pointed out, both in this committee and privately, there is no immediate sanctions relief. There is no trust in this. There has to be verification. Iran has to meet its portion of the deal before there is any sanction relief. So those are some of the positives that are in here. Now the concerns. Concern number 1, I don't trust Iran. I expect that the Iranians will cheat, and they will likely cheat on the margins to test our resolve. And at this juncture, I think it's incredibly important that both the United States and our allies have that resolve, that when they do cheat, we immediately hit them and send them a strong message. Whether that's, it may not be full sanctions being implemented, but that we send a message that that is not an acceptable behavior. As Ranking Member Engel pointed out in his testimony, look, at this juncture, let's be pragmatic. The deal is likely to move forward. So let's make sure we as a body do what we have to do to make sure that we take the deal that is present and we send a strong message. Concern number 2, Iran has not been a responsible nation. In fact, I think everyone on the panel, as well as all the members of this committee, understand Iran has been an actor to destabilize the region. That is not what this deal was about in terms of sanctions against Hezbollah and others. But we have to, I think most of us expect as Iran's economy improves, they likely will continue to fund these terrorist organizations and maybe increase funding. We, as Congress, as well as the administration, have to do everything in our power to reassure our allies, particularly Israel, to make sure that they have what they need to counteract what potentially is increased destabilization, increased funding to Hezbollah, et cetera. Concern number 3 is also making sure that we take advantage of these 15 years. Even folks that are against the deal understand that it does reduce the nuclear threat. We must put ourselves in a better position 15 years from now should Iran pursue nuclear ambitions, that if we have to intervene militarily, if we have to intervene in other ways, that we are in a better position to do so. Admiral Fallon, I'll ask a quick question because I'm running out of time. I think we all agree that Iran has destabilized the region. What would you suggest that we do, both as Congress as well as the administration, to work with our allies to mitigate potentially what is increased destabilization?
Well, one of the things that we've tried as a nation, and certainly our diplomats and commanders in this region that I think would be most helpful, would be to try to convince our allies in the area to work together, to cooperate with one another, to have capability that could be united in the event that Iran backtracks on these things. It's been a very, very difficult challenge. They each have their own interests, their priorities, and so forth, and it's kind of fragmented their reactions to Iran to date. They wring their hands, want help, but they've got to help themselves. And one of the key points here for me, in my experience, is the idea that we're going to go over there and straighten this all out, we're going to fix all this, and they're going to fix these countries is nonsense. They're going to have to fix
Admiral
it.
Fallon.
We just have to help.
Thank you, Dr. Barra.
Background.
Mr. Brooks of Alabama.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I've got some questions I'm going to ask each of you, too, and I'd appreciate it if you would answer them with either a yes or a no or an I don't know. They're very simple questions. The first one deals with, have you read the bill? And I'm talking about House Resolution 1191, Public Law 114-17, commonly known as the Corker-Cardin Bill, but more formally known as the, quote, Iran Nuclear Agreement Review Act of 2015, end quote. And by way of reference, that is the bill that governs how Congress is considering this Iran nuclear agreement. General Wald, have you read it?
I haven't read the whole thing.
Admiral Fallon, have you read it?
Not the whole thing.
Vice Admiral Beard, have you read it?
Yeah.
Mr. Wilselter, you've read it. All right,
Most
thank you.
of it, yeah.
Now, for those of you who have not read it, and also to refresh your recollections for those who have, I'm looking at paragraph A1, which is a requirement imposed on the President of the United States by this agreement that the President signed. Not later than 5 calendar days after reaching an agreement with Iran relating to the nuclear program of Iran, the President shall transmit to the appropriate congressional committees and leadership the agreement as defined in subsection H1, including all related materials and annexes. And the agreement is, of course, the Iran nuclear agreement. So we have to go to another provision in the bill to find out what the heck the word agreement means. And so I turn to paragraph H1. Quote, the term agreement means an agreement related to the nuclear program of Iran that includes the United States, commits the United States to take action, or pursuant to which the United States commits or otherwise agrees to take action regardless of the form it takes, including any joint comprehensive plan of action entered into or made between Iran and any other parties, and any additional materials related thereto, including annexes, appendices, codicils, side agreements, implementing materials, documents, and guidance, technical or other understandings. So my question to each of you is, pursuant to this requirement, has the President properly submitted to the United States Congress all side agreements related to the Iran nuclear agreement? General Wald, as you understand the situation, has the President done that?
I have no idea.
Admiral Fallon, yes, no, or I don't know?
I believe that agreements that the U.S. has negotiated with
That's
Iran
not what
and
it
with this
says.
group,
It says side agreements with Iran and third parties.
that
Have
we have
all of
been
those
a
been
part of.
produced?
that the U.S. has been a part of.
No, that's not the requirement under the statute. All right, Vice Admiral Beard, do you know if all these side agreements with Iran and third parties have been provided to the United States Congress?
I read Mr. Pompano's editorial on the same thing. I do not know, I'm not a lawyer, but I do think the Congress should view them all.
Mr. Wheel-Seltier?
I don't know, but I have a hunch about what the answer is.
Well, with respect to the International Atomic Energy Agency's secret agreement with Iran, I'll represent to you that that has not been presented to me as a member of the United States Congress, and in talking to my colleagues, it has also not been presented to them by the Obama administration, which means in turn that the Obama administration has failed to comply with the very law that it asked the United States Congress to sign. So my next question to you, if you know, and well, for time brevity, I see that I've only got a little bit over a minute left. I will answer this question myself. The question is, what is the effect of Barack Obama's failure to comply with the statute that he signed that governs our ability to review and or approve this agreement? And if you go to paragraph B3 of the agreement, of the law, it says, notwithstanding any other provision of law, prior to and during the period for transmission of an agreement in subsection A1 and during the period for congressional review provided in paragraph A, the President may not waive, suspend, reduce, provide relief from, or otherwise limit the application of statutory sanctions with respect to Iran under any provision of law. And so, unless you have something to the contrary, and I'd welcome any illumination that you may have, it seems to me until such time as the President complies with this statute and provides the United States Congress all side agreements, he has no right to relieve any sanctions, and if he does so, he's in violation of the law, which might be an impeachable offense. Do you have any comments in that regard? Admiral Fallon. Vice Admiral Beard. All right. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
All right, Lois Frankel of Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for this robust debate. Well, I've heard the number 15 a number of times. I have another way of looking at it. 15 seconds. That's how long a child who lives near the Gaza Strip in Israel has to take cover when a missile is shot into their city. 15 seconds. There have been over 10,000 rockets fired by Hamas with the support of Iran into Israel. There are 100,000 missiles that Hezbollah has aimed at Israel with the help of Iran. And you know, we've been talking a lot about Israel. What about the children in Syria who they don't even have a bomb shelter to run into? Barrel bombs with chlorine, with shrapnel dropped. We saw videos of children suffering from nerve gas poisoning right here in this meeting, all at the hands of Assad, who is being propped up by Iran. And so my biggest, listen, I applaud the President for trying a diplomatic settlement. I believe in a diplomatic settlement. I believe Iran should not have a nuclear weapon. But in my mind, the trade-off is too great right now. To give billions of dollars to Iran and not enough of a concession. So that's my take on it. But I do have a question. And I think this would help the public a lot in the discussion, which is if you could explain the relationship between Iran and Syria and Israel and why it is you believe that Iran continues to prop up all this horrific terrorist activity.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you brought up is really a good point that probably none of us really understand for sure. But I think the point that I take from that is that we want to treat Iran like we think. They don't think like us. And I think most people think, well, they have to. They have to. They're human beings. They have a different culture. They have a different way of looking at things. They have different standards. They have different goals. And I think one of the biggest problems we have is we really don't understand the Iranians. I think we, and basically—
Excuse me, though, but don't they have a regional mission?
The Iranians?
Yes, they have a—
Absolutely. They want to be a regional hegemon. There's no doubt about it. But the motivation part is difficult. And I think one of the dangers we have when we go into negotiations sometimes is, this is the way I wish it would be. Let's act that way. It really isn't. And I think the Iranians basically have a very limited morality from the standpoint of ethical truthness.
Opinion?
Yes.
Had a lot of those today. I'll give you one more. Very pragmatic. Their allies and surrogates and henchmen are Hezbollah in Lebanon. If Syria goes the other way, they're cut off from them. Very difficult to get the kind of support into Lebanon, given the Israeli control of the coast and the other borders. So very pragmatically, if they lose Syria, their best buds over there and proxies now, they're in deep trouble.
I agree with General Wall and Admiral Fallon. I think Iran has regional hegemony, a Shia crescent, if you will. They have a strategy that has no rules, no principles, no morals whatsoever. And their strategy, if you look at the last 15 years to date, has been brilliant. And I believe with this agreement, it's furthered.
I agree with what my colleagues have said, and would add only that one of the reasons that some of us have been futilely agitating for the Obama administration to intervene in Syria 3 and 4 years ago was because we regarded the fall of the Assad regime as probably the greatest strategic wound we could inflict upon the regime in Tehran. Assad is their most important regional client, and as things now stand, there is a belt, an axis, a corridor, whatever, of Iranian control, of Iranian influence from Tehran all the way to the Mediterranean. And that is one of the most important geopolitical facts about the region.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Frankel. We go now to Scott Perry of Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, would any of you disagree that Iran over the last, say, 36 years regarding agreements with the West, nuclear or otherwise, including on this very current day, have been known and documented, acknowledged cheaters? Would anybody disagree with that? Because I'm just trying for expediency's sake. Okay, so General Fallon, or Admiral Fallon, you as well or not? Because you.
Yeah, I said that. I don't trust these guys.
Okay, all right,
What
fair,
else is new?
fair enough. And so, in particular, because you're one member of the panel that has found some accord with this agreement, or at least a way to agree with it, or think it's better than it isn't. I want to have a conversation with you, but I don't want to have this dialectic conversation because I have a difference of opinion. But for your part in it, I wonder what facts, and I pause there purposely, what facts lead you to believe after 36 years, and thank you very much for your service, sir, you were right there, so you have an additional credibility that very few people have. But what facts lead you to your conclusion? Not suppositions of the future, not this Ayatollah will be dead, not...
The conclusion?
Yes.
What conclusion?
The facts that you've concluded that this is a good deal because of what might happen in the future in 15 years, the young population might change and overthrow its government, the Ayatollah will be dead, and there won't be a replacement. What facts?
So I wouldn't characterize this as a good deal, but I would characterize it as the best alternative we have to stop them from a nuclear weapon. And the reason I think that this has a chance to succeed is because the detailed implementation, if they're carried out, of the stopping the two nuclear pipelines of uranium and plutonium give us the best chance of achieving what we really want.
Arguably,
to stop
the timeline is 15 years maximum. Right? Would you acknowledge that? If I agree with you on everything, by the way, and I don't because I think they're going to continue to cheat, but that's my supposition.
So do I.
But regardless, in 15 years, It's open. The store's open. Do whatever you want.
I don't think so. I don't think it's
Based on what?
based on what? Based on the fact that if, in fact, this thing is implemented as it's been laid out in its various steps, they will have had 15 years with a minimum amount of fissionable material. Who knows what other things are going to happen? But the key thing is this.
But in 15 years, with all due
you
respect,
make this assumption that in 15 years everything's going to be exactly the same as it is today. I don't believe that for a second.
no, I don't think it is going to be exactly the same. Not the least of which is or their increased military capability over that period of time, and our diminished ability to reach out and touch them tactically because of their increased military prowess. But that having been said, I just have to disagree with you, and it seems to me that the facts don't comport with reality here, and so to get some of the other folks involved. Before I do that, though, a better deal. Let me ask you this: wouldn't a better deal include action reaction? So they act. We have problems with them. Not only the United States, but the Western civilized world has problems with it. So they act in accordance with some of the demands. In other words, stop some of the terrorist things and do this and do that. And then once you act, then we'll react. But this isn't, that's not what this deal is. Would not that, just as a simple structure, be a better deal?
But that's not part of the deal. Yeah, it might well be, but that's not part
But
of
you
the
said
deal.
there is no better deal, but you just acknowledged just now that that could be a better deal if we structured it that way.
That's a fiction. That's a
It's a
wish.
fiction
That's
because
an
we haven't
aspiration.
made it a reality. We have the possibility and the ability to make all that a reality.
I disagree.
All right. Let me ask you this. And Mr. Is it Weaseltier? How do you pronounce your name? Weaseltier, yeah. I'm fascinated to get your answer on this, too. We have very different cultures, ideologies, theologies, etc. Is there a possibility that we will never, ever get along with Iran or the people that think like the people that are in charge in Iran? And if that's true, at what point down the line of this agreement, at what point will that be obvious to you, and you will say we have to scuttle where we are and make the best of what we can, and that we're never going to agree with these people? Is there some point, sir, Admiral? And if not, if you need to think about Mr. Weaseltier, is there some point?
Well, look, I think I would be a little bit careful about painting cultural differences this grossly. We're human beings, they're human beings. We can understand each other. We can agree, we can disagree. They have their reasons, we have our reasons. But I'm not worried that they are so far gone into some alien culture or what someone said earlier, some culture of death. I mean, I don't know what these things mean, and they veer towards a kind of ugly prejudice, which I know you don't intend, but one has to be careful. I think that what we already understand about the worldview of this regime and about its history suffices to establish that it is our enemy, and it is the enemy of democracy, and it is the enemy of many states who are our allies, and it is the enemy of things that we cherish. So I think it couldn't be clearer.
Yeah, I'd like to comment on that too, if I might.
General Wald, I'm sorry, we're out of time. We're going to go to Jerry Connolly of Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And picking up on your last point, Mr. Weaseltier.
Yeah.
Is it unusual for the United States to negotiate with its adversaries?
Depends when and about what.
Did we do it with the Soviet Union?
About certain things we certainly did.
Was the Soviet Union dedicated to our destruction?
In some ways, ideologically, it was, and it had the ability to destroy us.
Did it also engage in warfare and terrorism and insurgency at our expense?
It did.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, hold on. Wait, may I say something about
Yes, sir.
the difference between our approach to Iran in our negotiations and the approach to the Soviet Union was this. This is now the 40th anniversary of the Helsinki Watch Accord. When it was proposed that the United States begin to press the Soviet Union on human rights during a period of intense arms control negotiations, there were people in favor of détente, statesmen, realpolitik people, who said, you're out of your mind, the stakes are too high, the nuclear negotiations will collapse, we cannot go after them on moral questions, on human rights questions, on democracy. Those people lost.
Yeah.
And we, in fact, did negotiate with them on both tracks, and the duality of those tracks is what's missing here,
Right.
and what determines some of the.
But there's also one big difference. We hadn't had a cone of silence for 30 years. This is our first real substantive engagement with this country in a long time. And to me, it is remarkable that actually we were able to negotiate an agreement like this, including with two would-be adversaries in various guises, Russia and China. Admiral Fallon, how close do you think, is it your assessment, Iran is to actually unnuclear, crossing that threshold as a nuclear state right now? Months, years?
I think it's close, certainly inside of years, but I'm also mindful of the couple of decades worth of, they're going to have it next year or 2 years. We've heard that from.
Does the agreement in front of us roll back?
Here's the key thing.
We're going to have to watch our time, Admiral Fallon. I'm not trying to interrupt you or be rude, but this chairman is going to put that gavel down in 2 minutes and 42 seconds. So I want to pursue a line of questioning with you, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Does this agreement roll back existing nuclear capabilities?
It takes off the table the fundamental nuclear capability that Iran has been working on.
Does it reduce enriched material?
Of course.
Does it reduce the level of enrichment of what is left behind?
The amount left behind is a fraction of what's available today.
And it reduces it to 3.67%. Is that not correct?
Correct.
Does it mothball a significant number of existing centrifuges?
Yes.
Does it change the equation at the plutonium production facility?
Stops it.
Stops it. Does it make it harder or easier for Iran to develop a nuclear weapon?
At least it appears to be, would be much more difficult.
And I heard the timetable. Some people want you to believe, want us all to believe that somehow magically this all ends in 15 years, and now we've created a guarantee for a nuclear Iran. Is that your view?
No, because there are parts of this arrangement that actually go well beyond that in perpetuity in some cases. Again, do we trust them? No. We're going to have to try.
We didn't trust the Soviets. Ronald Reagan said, "Do vrai, no provre." Trust, but verify. So we have no reason to trust them. That's why we create a, hopefully, verifiable and inspection-laden regime, right?
Or as my good friend and colleague Mike Mullen just said a couple of days ago, I read distrust.
Distrust.
Verify.
Real quickly, the so-called, the military refer to kinetic option. When you look at, other alternatives, a number of military have testified that the only real viable alternative, the notion that we're going to go back to the negotiating table and everyone's going to come back as one happy family after we renounce our own agreement and then ask them to start all over again, to me is delusional and very specious logic, if there's any logic at all. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think the reality here is that the other countries have already decided. And again, it's pretty busy commercial traffic into Tehran now. So
And again,
sanctions are gone.
Forgive me for not giving you more time and others in the panel, but real quickly, would you describe the kinetic option? What's going to be entailed if this fails? If we walk away from this successfully and the negotiating partners collapse, the military option, the kinetic option, what does it entail and what are the consequences? You as a former member of our military fear?
Probably a little more pointed than that. Actually had a responsibility for executing such thing if it were ever called upon. So you can do all kinds of things militarily. We have overwhelming comparative power to these guys. We could hurt them badly, in my opinion. The idea that this would somehow, by dropping a number of bombs, remove the threat, I believe is total nonsense. We could remove it, and that would probably involve a very, very significant land force to go do and basically take care of things. But to do this all just with a bunch of bombs, I don't think so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We go now to Ted Poe of Texas.
The Ayatollah today tweeted,
"Thank you, Ed.
Israel will not see the next 25 years. There will be nothing as a Zionist regime by the next 25 years. The Ayatollah also has recently said more than once, death to America. Seems to me that's their foreign policy. Is there any reason, General, that we should not believe the Ayatollah when he says death to America, down with Israel in 25 years? Or is that just a bunch of rhetoric?
You know, I've thought about this a lot, and I've heard this from people a lot, and they say, that just is rhetoric. It's, you just don't know.
But what do you think?
I don't know. But frankly, my issue is if I was 100% sure they were just saying that, it didn't matter, then I wouldn't care. I think there's a possibility that, first of all, as was pointed out, they have no compulsion about killing our troops, our U.S. troops, with some of the most horrendous weapons I've ever seen, these DIDs they've helped build, and are right behind that every time. The Quds Force commander the other day said the same thing that you just mentioned.
So why this nuclear?
They say that,
I'm sorry,
that every day.
General, I'm
in
reclaiming
Israel.
my time. I know I was just a sergeant in the Air Force,
No,
but I'm
sorry.
reclaiming my time.
No, anyway, it doesn't seem logical to us, but I don't think we understand them. I'd say you got to take it for what it's worth.
All right, Admiral, I'll ask the Navy a question.
Pass on the Navy? Oh.
No, I didn't say I'd pass on the Navy. Let me move on and ask something else. Admiral Byrd, let me ask you a couple of questions about the policy of Iran. We know, the world knows this deal is going on, and we have Iran making all of these statements. Assume everything in the deal takes place. Is the world going to be safer or less safe at the end of the day from a nuclear Iran?
Well, as I've testified, I think arguably in the short term, as Admiral Fallon would say, from a nuclear perspective, we might be safer. In terms of the conventional and all the things I mentioned, from asymmetric, less safe, and the region more destabilized. In the long term, we'll have a nuclear Iran, which we have sanctioned, and we will be much less safe.
Do you think when the Ayatollah says death to America, he's serious, or is that just some a rhetoric?
I think he is serious on his tweeting and things he says, and if you'll pardon my cynicism, he never agreed to not be that way in the deal. He just agreed to comply with this limitation for 15 years on nuclear weapons.
The inspection, if I understand this agreement, the inspection is going to be done by the Iranians. Is that right, Admiral Beard?
Sir, I don't know. I know there's speculation. I think this goes to Mr. Isaac's questions about the secret agreement, or at least not revealed to the Congress of the IEA and Iran and what they've dealt to in terms of the additional protocol.
Don't you think Congress ought to see this side agreement, however many they are, whatever it is, before we even decide whether or not it's good for the United States?
I absolutely do.
I think it's foolhardy that we would make a vote on such an important national security issue if we don't see the side deals. It seems to me, though, the Iranians are going to be the ones that investigate the Iranians to see if the Iranians are cheating or not. I used to be a judge. That's like putting 12 burglars on a jury for trying a burglar. I've got problems with the Iranians investigating the Iranians about nuclear weapon development. Does anyone see in this agreement that scenario, or is it some independent outside group? Admiral Fallon, what do you think?
Well, could I point out something, Congressman?
Just answer that question. I only have 5 minutes and 20 seconds left. Is it the Iranians going to be investigating the Iranians, and we got to give them 24 days notice before we show up?
I don't believe that.
You didn't see that in the agreement?
I didn't read it that way, no.
Did you read the agreement?
Sure.
Well, I read it that way. So let me just ask all four of you this question. We've got 4 seconds left. Should Congress approve this deal or not? General?
It's going to make Iran more strong.
Admiral Fallon?
Congress should support the implementation of this thing as the
Admiral
best
Beard?
alternative.
Disapprove the deal.
Yes, sir. No. Thank you.
All right, we go now to Mr. Ted Yoho of Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, appreciate you being here. I think so much has been said here already today. Number one is, what is number one here? everything that we've already talked about, I think we're all in agreement that Iran is an enemy of the United States. Is that, we're all in agreement of that. Iran is a leading sponsor of state terrorism. Of the young men and women that have been killed or wounded in Afghanistan and Iraq, 70% came from IEDs, 90% of those came from Iran. And you just stated, Vice Admiral Byrd, that this deal will make Iran stronger. Is that General Wald? Okay. Admiral Fallon? With the release of the money, whether it's $50 billion or $100 billion, will it make them stronger?
I think that's the issue here. And I think the issue here is that we're not sure what we're going to get from a verification, and yes, they will become stronger.
I'm going to talk about that. Admiral Fallon, will this make them stronger, getting this money?
I don't believe so.
You don't believe so? No. Okay. Mr. Westelier?
Yeah, in non-nuclear and conventional measures of military strength, asymmetrical warfare, terrorism, and so on.
Okay, so let's look at where they're at right now without this money. They're funding terrorism around the world. I mean, as short as 3 years ago, they plotted to kill the Saudi ambassador on U.S. soil. So we got a good idea, and Admiral Fallon, you said we can't project into the future. It's kind of like Que Sera Sera, kind of a Doris Day song. No offense to you. Hold on just a second.
I don't believe that for a minute.
And you were saying
so
that
I'm not clairvoyant.
you served for 40 years in this country, and I thank you for your service. And I know strategically in the military, you project 5, 10, 15, 20, maybe 100 years, hopefully down the future. All one has to do to look at one's past is look at the present situation. You see Iran, the leading sponsor of terrorism around the world, death to America, death to Israel, they're funding Hezbollah, Hamas. They've already said that they're going to retrofit over 100,000 Scud-type missiles for Hezbollah with pinpoint accuracy laser technology. They're already saying that. They're already going to rebuild the tunnels. We see what they're doing in Central and South America. So we see their present situation. We can predict what they're going to do in the future by what they're doing today. And I mean, it's pretty clear they're an enemy of the United States. They're going to get stronger from this. And you know, as far as an option, we need to walk away from the table. Actually, we need to run away. And the world, I think, will follow us. Yes, there's economic development in there, but if we don't walk away from this deal, there will be no snapback. And that was a fallacy anyways. Walk away, bring them back, put the sanctions back on, and when they're ready to negotiate, they will release our 4 Americans. They will denounce terrorism. They will stop stating what they are doing and this threat around the world. And it goes back to Sharia, not Sharia law, but Islamic law, the law of taqiyya. Lie, cheat, and deceit every chance you can if it advances the Islamic State. And that's what they have done for thousands of years. And Mr. Westelier.
No, Congressman, I have to say that my opposition, my view of the Iranian government has been perfectly clear. But for the record, I want to note that Christians and Jews have lied and cheated for thousands of years, too. That the explanation of this in terms of their religion seems to me to be inadequate and really cannot explain what it is that...
I'm not going to disagree with that, but I'm not negotiating with a Jewish state or a Christian state that's going to get a nuclear bomb.
Right, I just suggest...
According to our preamble of the Constitution, the #1 goal of the United States of America is for the common defense of my country.
Absolutely.
And that's what I'm worried about.
Absolutely.
And this is going to, you all agreed that this is going to make Iran stronger.
My point is only that we need to analyze Iran, even in our opposition to it, in an intellectually responsible manner.
And intellectually responsible, this is a bad deal. We need to run away from it. And I'm going to yield back, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. I just wanted to get that out. I appreciate the service all of you did, and I would hope you would help us turn this deal down and make a better deal. The Corker and Cardin amendment or bill, we've already passed the deadline of that. This is a moot point. We're beyond that, and we need to start over. I yield back.
We stand adjourned. I want to thank the panel one more time for your testimony here today. And also, thank you very much for your service. Admiral and Vice Admiral, General, thank you for your service to this country. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
Hey, listen. You did a great job. This idea.
Alice in Wonderland. Yeah, thank you. I've got a question.